Hello, I'm Luciana Spracher with the City of Savannah's Municipal Archives. This month, I'll be delivering both your monthly Hungry for History program and closing out our Autos in the Archives series with what can best be called some things that have been percolating with me here as we have worked on this series since February. I've got some new items from the archives that didn't make it into the series, some items shared with us by the public, and some ideas on what autos have meant in our lives. It's been a really fun series for us to work on. It has generated a lot of good discussion in the archives here, uncovered a lot of goodies we hadn't noticed before, and for today's closing, we'll just dip a toe or a tire back into the archives one final time as we use autos to discuss discovery, identity, and memory. In case you missed the Autos in the Archives series, for the past few months we have been diving into our collections here at the City Archives to share historical images of the automobiles in Savannah and then using them as a jumping off point to explore auto-related history. All of the images and supporting captions will remain available on our website as an online exhibit, but here are a few highlights from the series. Now on to what didn't make it into Autos in the Archives. When we first started working on the series, we identified images of automobiles and then identified themes based on the photographs we had. Alternatively, we also identified some themes we wanted to cover and then sought out images to flesh those out. We found some great images right off the bat, but some just didn't fit in a theme. Or in a few cases, by the time we found a photo, we had already covered that topic and had to move on, never getting to share some really great images. But perhaps the biggest challenges for us is the way our collections are cataloged. We are in a transportation or automobile archives. The car has been taken for granted by us when we have processed and cataloged our collections. We often have made note of other forms of transportation in our records. For instance, trains, streetcars, horses and buggies, but not cars. We are so accustomed to cars being part of our daily lives that almost none of our collections make note of the presence of an auto. And if they all did, we would have too many hits during searches with thousands of images, including cars as secondary subjects, like those you see here. This project has identified several omissions in our cataloging practices that we need to work on in the future to improve discovery, not just of cars, but of other features we have taken for granted but may want to seek out one day. For our exploration of the idea of discovery, let's look at some of the photographs we discovered during this project. As archivists, we retain records because they have enduring value, and often that use is different than their original purpose. We are constantly appraising collections to determine whether we should expend our limited resources to retain them, and sometimes all the values of a collection aren't evident to us initially. The West Broad Street appraisals are an excellent example of a collection that we have held onto for many years, but we are constantly discovering new uses for. The records were originally created to appraise properties along West Broad Street, which is now Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, in order to purchase and raise them to make way for Interstate 16 in the late 1950s and early 1960s. We originally preserved them as a record of the buildings and neighborhoods that were lost in this activity. We have since used the collection to look for specific businesses, houses, churches, and street views. But it could have been a very useful collection for us in the Autos in the Archive series because almost every single image depicts an automobile, whether it be a taxi cab outside of Nick's place on West Broad Street like you see on the left, or a pickup truck in Frogtown like you see here on the upper right, or the appraiser's car working through the lanes. This collection has many uses that have yet to be realized as well. like studying living conditions in Savannah during the mid-20th century, comparing city infrastructure in different neighborhoods, or documenting businesses on West Broad Street. Similarly, we have little treasures in odd places. The City Council meeting papers include petitions from the public to City Council for a range of issues, often with supporting documentation. This photograph comes from a 1954 petition. It notes the southeast corner of Liberty and Drayton Streets to request a curb cut. But what is interesting to us now in this image is seen through the lens of an automobile is the plethora of signs marking this building, which is now the site of the Hitch restaurant. But it was originally constructed in 1920 for the Chatham Motor Company. And without a doubt, with all of these signs that you see in this image, operated a car dealership and showroom for Cadillacs and Pontiacs. Next time you are nearby, look up at the exterior facade and you can still see the car wheels with wings that give you a hint at the original use of the building. And you can see that in this little image on the lower left. As with most archival repositories, here at the City Archives, we are always working on a backlog of collections that we are trying to get open to the public. As a result, we almost always have some materials that are not fully inventoried and cataloged or identified yet, and are therefore slightly hidden from full discovery. The donation of Sandy Batiste related to the White Bluff community that we received as part of our Savannah History Roundup project is a perfect example. We received this collection in 2019, but just recently got it fully processed and online for public use. And in doing so, we realized we had these great images of residents posed with their automobiles. Another collection that is a work in progress, and one that we didn't even think to look at for the Autos in the Archive series, was the Historic Savannah Inventory Ward Notebooks, which is a community digitization project we have been working on with Historic Savannah Foundation throughout the pandemic. This collection includes survey cards and photographs for Savannah's wards and is primarily consulted by researchers doing building and property research. But as you can see from just these 4 photographs from the Decker Ward volume, it is full of images of automobiles in the 1960s in Savannah. In these images alone, I've noted things that piqued my interest. From a station wagon, which reminded me of riding backwards as a child in my dad's station wagon, and looking at the driver in the car behind me the whole time, to the Matthew Seafood sign on Ellis Square, which still hangs outside of Sorry Charlie's restaurant, to an old Volkswagen Beetle, and finally the intersection of Bay and Whitaker Streets, which showed remnants of the old brick pavement still in the picture. This is another collection that probably has a lot buried in it if only one starts looking at it with a closer eye. In one of my early hunts for autos for our series, I ran across a wonderful assortment of photos of hand-painted advertising signs in the Metropolitan Planning Commission Historic Preservation's photograph collection. But like cars, they also weren't cataloged in a way that I would have found them if I was looking for them. These photographs were simply indexed by address. So here is another hole in our discovery tools and some hidden gems in our collection that I wanted to take this opportunity to share with you. You can see they're beautiful both for their artwork and their color and their diversity. You have images for Belford's Groceries, WSOK, and a knife sharpening. I recently did another talk on our auto series and shared those same hand-painted advertising signs. And a couple of days later, I received an email with this photograph of a CocaCola sign painted on the side of a building along Price Street. The photographer had looked up when the slogan was used by Coca-Cola and dated the advertising campaign to around 1908 to 1910. One of our favorite things in the archives is when sharing our discoveries with you results in you sharing your discoveries back with us. Turning our attention to identity, I wanted to revisit these 2 images from our Autos in the Archive series, which show 2 different groups of people seated in the same prop automobile inside a photographer's studio. Through the first decades of the 20th century, cars were a status symbol and luxury that only the wealthy could afford to buy and maintain. Studio automobile portraiture became a popular genre as autos gained popularity in American culture. By having their portraits taken while sitting inside a car in their fine clothes, these individuals were sending a strong message about how they wanted to be seen by the world. And I might flip back to these images from the White Bluff Community Collection of residents posed by their automobiles. Since we weren't present when the photos were taken, we can't say for sure that it was a deliberate act to present themselves with their car, but it doesn't seem a far stretch to think they wanted to be photographed dressed up next to their cars. In the article, A Car is Not Just a Car, author Evgeny Klochkin stated car ownership celebrates your agency, emboldens your self-worth, and empowers positive change. It provides a shelter on wheels, a badge of identity, and a means to determine your own path. Once you have achieved car ownership, most want to celebrate this significant milestone. And how better to celebrate something permanently than through a photograph? This photograph is in the W.W. Law collection. For those of you not familiar with Wesley Wallace Law, commonly known as W.W. Law, he was president of the Savannah branch of the NAACP from 1950 until 1976, and a leader in the civil rights movement in Savannah, as well as a historian and preservationist. Mr. Law's notes on the back of this photo included the date, January 23, 1962, and the location of the photograph as the home of Mr. Fred Chapman. We ultimately decided not to use this photograph in our post on segregation and desegregation, but it is an important image about a period in Savannah and the nation's history, so I did want to share it. However, when I was looking at it for my talks, rather than thinking about what the bumper sticker was conveying, I started thinking about it in terms of our cars as billboards of ourselves. Today, when you drive around, you see many cars with bumper stickers on them that put on display the beliefs and affiliations of the car's owner. We use our cars often as an extension of ourselves, whether through vanity license plates, bumper stickers, or by customizing them with dark tint, spoilers, or specialty rims, or even just in the cars we choose to buy and drive in the first place. Their make and model, color, size, are they a hybrid or electric, sports car, minivan, or SUV? I was somewhat hesitant to share this image, not knowing if Chapman's family was still around. But at the time Fred Chapman was driving this car in the 1960s, he wanted everyone to know through his auto about himself, and that included his affiliation with the KKK. We all make choices about what we convey publicly about our identity through our automobile, either quite deliberately or through subtle choices you didn't even realize you were making, including those who choose not to drive a car at all in favor of public transportation or living where they can walk and bike everywhere. This is one of my favorite images that turned up in our hunt for cars. This is John Black, photographed with his Chevrolet in 1978 as part of the Savannah Landmark Rehabilitation Project. The project was aimed at documenting buildings, but clearly they were drawn to Mr. Black and his pristine auto just like I was. It seems like he had been caring for his baby for many years and was very proud of it, and it reminded me of my stepfather Bert. When my mother married Bert in 1987, he was still driving around in the very first car he had bought for himself brand new, a 1963 Chevrolet Super Sport Impala. He had cars before that, but they were used cars that his father had helped purchase, and this was his first brand new car, purchased entirely on his own. This Super Sport, which was black with red faux leather bucket seats, was, as he told me recently, the bee's knees back then, and an outrageous car that he probably shouldn't have bought because he had a family. He was very proud and attached to his Chevrolet, just like Mr. Black evidently was to his. I've already mentioned a couple of cars from my childhood memories. My stepfather's Super Sport Impala that he brought into the family, riding around in the back of my father's station wagon, though this station wagon is nothing like his brown beast from the 1970s. I think children today are missing out on that fun experience of making silly faces at strangers and cars behind you as they get to ride around in today's minivans and SUVs. But I wanted to share some more memories that popped up during our series, some from me and some from others. This image of West Broad Street in front of Union Station is one of my favorite photographs from all of our collections. Union Station was torn down in the 1960s, and West Broad Street was really changed, and I would say decimated, by urban renewal and the introduction of Interstate 16 into Savannah during that decade. This image was taken in the early 1920s and gives you a wonderful view of a thriving business corridor, with lots of automobiles lined up outside of the station as people hurry past on foot. I was recently reviewing an oral history interview taken with Wallace Cody as part of the Carver Village History Roundup project. In it, he talked about West Broad Street when he was growing up, saying, quote, "Oh my God, it was amazing. I'll say from Broughton Street all the way down to Victory Drive, there was clothing stores, nightclubs, black-owned businesses, bars, theaters, and everything was on West Broad Street at that time. And they used to have parades and plus churches on every corner just about. And it was amazing. And plus the Union Station. It was a beautiful place before they tore it down." I think he touches on the vibrancy of the corridor that many remember from their youth and one that this photo captures as well. I latched onto this photo for the vibrancy of the melting of transportation with the train and the autos and the pedestrians, but it's unfortunate and ironic that one of the harshest blows to West Broad Street was the popularity of the automobile and the interstate. This was another strong image that just didn't fit into our theme for the series. I couldn't get it out of my head, and it kept triggering a memory for me from my own childhood. Here is a really powerful juxtaposition of a big shiny car visiting one of the poorest neighborhoods in Savannah at the time, Tin City, taken in the late 1940s or early 1950s. It reminded me of a trip to Panama City when I was a child, and we walked through one of the poorest areas that surrounded the presidential palace. Here was this beautiful white, glistening home surrounded by shacks, most with no doors or only blankets for doors. Yet there were really nice cars parked in front of many of them. As a child, I was struck by what seemed to be a strong importance or value placed on the car over the home, and I couldn't understand why you would buy a brand new car before a front door. But as I've been learning more about automobiles in our society and culture, that our cars are an extension of our homes. A car isn't just a car, it's an extension and an enabler of the person we most like to be. Independent ownership of our mobility is ownership of ourselves. Perhaps those living in that neighborhood couldn't afford to move out of it, but they could afford to drive out of it, if at least temporarily. For those of you not familiar with Tin City, it was on the eastern side of downtown near East Broad and Liberty Streets and developed during the Great Depression after Lewis Ellis built the first shack of discarded tin with a little garden patch after he was evicted from his home. In this image, you see Sanitary Inspector W. Leftwich and E.B. Surreals, a sociologist, who are comparing data on Tin City. They were accompanied by the manager of the Savannah Herald newspaper. Tin City was later razed and replaced by public housing in the 1950s. We did use this image in our post about autos on Bay Street when we talked about truck traffic, but I had to show it again as I talked about memories, because check out that phone booth just sitting there on the sidewalk. I love how a car could just pull up on the side of Bay Street and someone could just jump out and make a phone call. Was right next to City Hall, but of course times have changed. You no longer make sure you have a dime or a quarter when you leave the house, but you make sure you have your cell phone and that it has a charge. This is another example of technology that we took for granted, so it wasn't cataloged or indexed in a way that we could find it in our collections if we were looking for an image of a phone booth. Another share that came into the archives as a result of the Autos in the Archive series was from Ulsters Nursery, who took that opportunity to reflect back on their own role in Savannah's automobile history. Sales manager Terry Beasley, who has been with the nursery for 45 years, shared these two images with us. Ulsters is a fourth-generation family business that started in 1888 in Savannah. The automobile on the left, that's circled in red, was their first motorized delivery vehicle and is believed to be the first commercial vehicle of its type that operated in Savannah. It is pictured at their greenhouse facility off of Skidaway Road alongside their horse and buggy delivery wagons. So it shows the transition and evolution of delivery methods. The auto on the right is a slightly later vehicle photographed in front of their retail shop at Oglethorpe and Bull Street. I hope you've enjoyed this little dip back into the archives to discover new collections or collections in new ways, discuss identity through the lens of automobiles, and explore some memories triggered by cars and interesting photographs. I hope this will trigger your own memories and prompt you to share stories and photographs with your friends and families, and maybe even with us here at the Municipal Archives. In closing, here are a few fun images of cars in front of City Hall, where I'm talking to you from today. The top is a very early car, what probably was called a horseless carriage at the time, and it's riding down the center of Bay Street with a streetcar behind it and horse and buggies parked along the side of the road. In the middle is a picture with City Hall when it was still under construction in 1905, and members of City Council are posed in Franklin automobiles in front of it on Bull Street. And on the bottom is a picture of a car riding down Bay Street, and it shows angled auto parking along the side of Bay Street that provided access to City Hall and businesses along Factors Walk. If you would like to learn more about our collections, please visit our website at savannahga.gov/municipal archives or contact us at archives@savannahga.gov. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you at our next Hungry for History program. Have a great day.